No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Hey everyone, this is Chris.
And Lorenzo.
And welcome to our Best of Saturday series. Now that we have hundreds of episodes, we get a lot of listeners asking us where to start.
So we'll be selecting some of our most popular episodes to share each Saturday from our years of podcasting. We hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about boundaries.
Nice. We definitely need those.
Definitely important. Before we had this kind of work from home, flexible work environment, kind of hybrid thing that could change on a dime and go from one month to the next being, in person to not in person to we don't know what the future is going to hold. Before that, boundaries, everybody had their own, what was right for them in terms of their work-life balance. And I'm not talking about like the amount of time you put into work, but rather when work gets to seep into personal life and vice versa. And ever since, for the last 18 to 24 months, what has happened is those lines have been blurred. And in some regard, it has been a positive thing for a lot of people. And in other instances, it's been a negative. But there's always been this kind of back and forth pull when it comes to the relationship between a person and their leadership, or leaders and their people, when it comes to boundaries. I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, have you ever had a relationship with a leader or someone who reports to you where one of you decided to bring up to the other one that they thought or you thought that the blurring of the lines between work and personal life, or that the boundaries were not where they should be and that something needed to change?
I've had the conversation about boundaries. I've had the conversation about time off, request days off, things like that. Absolutely. That happens, quite often, just to kind of either talk about what do people need or what's going on. I've always done my best to kind of be very respectful of that, and respect people's time off and time away, just because, it's good to refresh and to not have to deal with things. But I also think, though, in the industry that we've been in, and a lot of leaders that I've led before in the past, having salaried leaders that have access to work at home while, a phone call, a text message, or reviewing an email, at certain times of the day could be very helpful in not having to deal with a lot more time the next day. So, I just think that early on in my career and as a salaried manager, there was always just kind of just expectation of that you're on salaried, and yes, you have days off, but at no point is that an element of being disconnected from the business. And then, of course, like if you're on vacation, people try to really respect that as much as possible. I think where it's come into a lot more of a different lens for me personally, and we've been saying this in the podcast now for a couple of years, is people spoke about kind of the virtual world and the work from home and how that's different, and how it's it feels disconnected and that type of thing. And I've always said, like, look, for a lot of people, we're putting cameras in our homes and talking to people about kids and pets and backgrounds and things like that. So I think that yes, we're definitely in a place now where the dialogue and the conversation probably needs to be had a little bit more often, or clarifying again as people have gone back and forth, potentially from physical workspaces to working from home, and having access and doing things a little bit differently, or even taking jobs that move you from an office into a work from home environment. Like I think it's important right now to consider that, and to make sure that we're aware of it. It's just different for different people. I think some people don't mind it at all. Some people actually like it and they appreciate it and they want to kind of stay in tune and stay connected. And then other people, would like to have this is when I'm at work and this is when I'm at home. But I think overall the dialogue is definitely due for in kind of an update and maybe a reimagining.
I remember being a kid and the moment when I was told by my mom that my dad was on a work call, and he was on his cell phone, and I was, probably 12 or 13 years old, 14 years old. And it was a kind of a weird moment to me, because before that time, my dad didn't work from home, like he went to work and then he came home and then he was home. And if he was ever at his desk working and looking frustrated, it was at paying the bills and balancing the checkbook and all that stuff. It wasn't at the stuff that he did when he was outside the house. And then the cell phone became kind of the first thing in my generation that kind of blurred those lines, to make it so you can be reached outside of the business, so therefore you may be reached outside the business. And you're right, if a person is an hourly employee, it's less likely they're going to be asked to do this. But there are a lot of salary people out there and a lot of salary leaders out there who may be asked to engage in the business when they would normally not be asked to engage in the business. And these boundary lines are something that are so varied across environments, from company to company, from person to person, even from country to country. You look at a country like France, who has passed laws that make sure that bosses can't email their employees outside of like normal typical work hours of 8 to 6 or whatever it is. And they do this for a couple of reasons. One, I'm sure there are some bosses out there who have abused it. They email their people at 9 p.m. and expect them to respond. But also, there's always going to be some differences in terms of what people have going on in their lives. We all know the coworker who is really adamant about getting out of work 4 seconds before they're supposed to leave, and they have this like really clear delineation between work life and personal life. And then we have those coworkers that we know them all, the ones who just seem to have nothing going on in their lives besides work. And so they do answer those emails at 9 p.m. or those phone calls on a Saturday morning at 7 a.m. when they weren't scheduled to work, or stuff like that. And those people it does two things. One, it might drive them. Maybe that's what they love doing. But it sets the impression that the bar for commitment and performance is people who do that. And so if I'm a leader and I am one of those people who doesn't have anything going on in my life besides work, and I might reach out to all 7 of my direct reports. Oh, the 2 that replied on a Saturday at 3 a.m., those are the committed ones, right? And that can blur the lines, and it can give the impression that you have that performance lies where it doesn't really lie, or vice versa. And so I think that the boundaries conversation, there's no one right or wrong way, besides making sure that there's clear communication between a leader and their employees, and there's respect going vice versa. But I've had to have conversations with people before where I don't reply to an email intentionally or answer a call intentionally that is outside of the hours that I want this relationship to exist, when I absolutely could have. I could have answered the call. I could have responded to the email, and I intentionally didn't. And it was to set the expectation that this is what the boundary is. And then I'd reply the next day. But when I replied the next day, it wouldn't be, sorry, I was doing this. It was replying as if they had just sent it 4 seconds earlier, because this is the first time that I was working since they sent it. And I think that those boundaries can get pushed one way or the other over a person's actions, more so than it's not like a conversation. The leader doesn't say, okay, you're expected to answer your calls 24 hours a day. It just kind of happens. And then it's really hard to push it back or change it if you don't have a good relationship with your boss.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great call out. And the part about kind of role modeling the behavior, I think, is so important. I think, and again, to your point, by industry, by organization, by jobs themselves, like I, immediately think of like doctors and people that are on call or carry a pager, like there's just
you signed up for that, man.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like a lot of those jobs doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the time. It's just that that's kind of how that industry is set up, and they do these rotations and things like that. I think though, as a leader, role modeling that for people, I think, is really important. I also think that it's interesting to me, because I think the thing that frustrates people the most, in my experience of feeling like boundaries are being crossed or there's too much communication, is typically when a leader doesn't role model the same behavior.
Right.
So, the leader will typically send out communication and expect that there's a follow-up quickly, a response quickly, or that type of thing. And yet that same leader, when they're asked to do something or when they're trying to contact it, they're not Johnny on the spot to get back to the person. So I think that can typically drive a lot of the frustration elements of it. But I absolutely do think that there's from where we are, the amount of access that we have this day and age, the way in which cell phones are kind of always on our hip. Like they always say, like, one day AI will be here, and it's like, well, actually AI is right in your pocket. Like there's, when it comes to the amount of information that we consume from work to personal to communication to games to mindless videos, like all the things that we do with our technology. Puts it very, very close to us in that capability. I was just having lunch with a friend yesterday who carries two phones. It's a work and a personal, because one time they got a work call on their personal phone that it took a long time to resolve and a lot of issues and things like that. And it was kind of an unexpected call to the point where they had to make that decision. And so they have technology, they have it with them, and they carry it at all times, but it allows them to kind of specify the urgency of what's going on and what the communication is and make it happen. But having that actual division between two phones, not for everybody, but I think that's just setting up a boundary and figuring out a way to make it work.
It's interesting because I did that myself a long time ago. I had two phones, and it was because the company I worked for issued me a phone. They gave me a phone, and the reason why I decided to carry two phones at that time was that I didn't like the idea of doing my personal things on a device that I didn't own. I didn't like the idea that they could take the device back at any time, and then I wouldn't own my own number, or that they could have access to whatever I had on the device because it was their device. And so that was the purpose for having two phones. But what it ended up doing for me was that it allowed me to leave my work phone in my office because I was in a work from home environment already. This was many, many years ago. And when I left my office for the day, the work phone stayed in the office and the personal phone came out with me. And there were probably 3 people who I worked with who had my personal cell phone number. And if one of those 3 people called my personal cell phone number outside of work hours, I absolutely answered, because there would be a reason for that. And it maybe never happened, maybe happened once ever. And there was a reason for that, and that was important. And those people didn't abuse that, because the relationship was there. And I think that's what it comes down to, is that there's I don't think there's anything wrong with having the conversation around why something may happen outside of what the normal scope is, as long as that line isn't slowly and kind of, I don't want to say unintentionally, because it's not unintentional, but it's not like methodical. The leader isn't pushing back the line to say, okay, let's see just how much I can get this person to work. It's just that something came up for that leader. That leader felt a sense of urgency around it. Maybe that sense of urgency wasn't shared by the person who they were reaching out to. And so because there isn't that symbiosis of agreement when it comes to what the urgency is or what the problem is, then it becomes why is this person reaching out to me at this time to do this? And that's when it becomes really important. And it's much, much easier to do this at the very beginning of a relationship, right? So you go onto a team and that first email comes through at 8 p.m. Whether or not you reply to that email sets a tone for the expectation of whether or not you will reply to future ones. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying it is. It's what people think in their head. And so the ability to kind of set those boundaries in your own actions at the beginning of a relationship is the best way to set them, for sure. Because if you are trying to set the boundaries too lenient for yourself, meaning you're not replying to anything. If you're a salaried employee and it's 9 to 5 and you get an email at 5:02 and it's something that is clearly an important thing and you see it and you intentionally decide not to reply to the next day, eventually that might become a problem for some people. But then it's on them to bring it up to you and say, "Hey, I noticed I sent you an email and you didn't respond till the next day. I didn't know. Were you not at your desk or whatever it is?" And you can have that conversation. But the idea is you as the employee need to figure out what is right for you and set the expectation in your behavior, not in your words. You don't sit somebody down and say, okay, now let's talk about boundaries here. This is what I expect. That's a really awkward conversation to have, especially if you're not trying to solve a problem. That's the conversation you have when the problem's already there and you're trying to figure out why we continue to have this problem, and you have to kind of hash it out with somebody. But the easiest way, again, is by your actions from the beginning, and then let the person you're setting the boundary with come to you if they have a problem with it. It's really hard to do that if you already have that issue there. If you found yourself, you wake up one day and it's like, wow, I feel like I'm working 24 hours a day because I tried to be nice and answer a call once, and now that's the expectation after 3 years. Much harder to push that boundary.
Absolutely. And with that, it's time for this episode's 1-minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
The 1-minute hack.
All right, for this episode's 1-minute hack, here's what I want you to do. I want you to write down what you consider to be the normal hours of your work, the normal days and normal hours if you have them. If it's a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, whatever it is, normal hours, write those down. And then I want you to go to wherever you send email from, computer, a smartphone, whatever it is, and I want you to go to your sent email folder. And I want you to count the number of emails over the last 30 days that you have sent in the time that is not part of those work hours. Just the sent ones, because you can receive email all the time. Look at your sent box, count that number, and see if that fits right with you. If it's 2 or 3 that are outside those normal hours, maybe that's fine. If it's 50 or 60 outside those work hours, then it's possible that the boundaries that you have with your work and your leadership team isn't where they should be to be conducive to your overall long-term engagement and productivity and happiness with your business and with the relationship you have with your leadership teams. So from this point forward, start taking steps to not do those things. Don't talk to somebody about it. Don't have a conversation. Just act the way you want to act in a way that fits with those boundaries, and let them set themselves. Very few people will have an issue with that and reach out to you. The ones that do, you can have that conversation. But this is a way to make sure that you can kind of push that boundary to where it needs to be, because as this moves forward and we're in a work from home or flexible work environment, the worst thing that we can do is to just feel like there are no boundaries anymore, because then we feel like we're always working.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And when you started talking about that, I was like, oh man, guilty as charged, because I am known to get up at 5 in the morning and just forward out emails of things. But then when you were talking through that, here's what I realized. I don't necessarily ask for action on anything. Most of what I send out at those times are just information or forwarding things out so they have it. But there's no expectation of a response. There's no expectation of any action. And then when it comes to the shifts that are scheduled or the normal business operating hours, then that's typically when I would move to like text message as a more immediate form of communication for people that are working to get information. So I think that, with so many different platforms and so much different communication, I like what you shared about just really being conscious and thinking about it and making sure that you do have some type of a process set up to really consider it, as we started the show at the beginning. Because as leaders, like the reality is most leaders want to stay in tuned. Most leaders that I know actually want to be accessible and want to have that type of a relationship in regards to just being close to what's going on, because there's many times when it's just easier to solve something or answer a quick question or provide a bit of guidance or have a 2-minute conversation with someone than to do nothing on that day and then have to walk into it the next day kind of right when you clock in. So, I think as leaders, there's just really this important element of making sure that we are considering these things and starting to put out, just a framework of how we want to make sure that we're role modeling the proper behavior and providing support to the team to make sure that they're not, overstepping boundaries for their people.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so I'll add some clarity to this. When you send out emails at 5 o'clock in the morning, you're not replying to somebody and giving that person the impression that this is when you work, to where now they feel like they can reach out to you at 5 o'clock in the morning. Oh, because Lorenzo's working. These are emails you're sending to other people. The ones I'm talking about are when you send an email that is answering somebody else's question, replying to somebody else's email they sent you. Those are the ones that are the most important. You choosing to engage at 5 a.m. because you send something out. If that's what works for you, that's great. That doesn't mean that there's a boundary problem there. It means that you've decided that that's the easiest time to do this because you want to engage face-to-face with somebody when you're with them, and you don't want to have to compete sitting at a computer or have your face on a phone when you should be talking to somebody face-to-face. So that's very, very different. This is about emails that you have replied to put out somebody else's fire or answer somebody else's question when you have to look back and go, oh, wait a minute, was I too accessible? Was I too responsive? As opposed to making sure those clear boundaries are set.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And have a great day.